Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So I have an exciting video for you today. Well, at least exciting from a nerdy point of view from Diablo 2 Resurrected. And it has to do with a very interesting mechanic known as monster suspension. Now, to give you the backstory on how we managed to figure this out, it has to do with Uber Diablo. So we noticed something very strange about Uber Diablo, and when I say we, I mean the entire kinship. And what we noticed is that Prevent Monster Heal would sometimes just not work on Uber Diablo. We couldn't exactly figure out why. Now, the moral of the story is that, well, it does work on Uber Diablo, but it also doesn't work on Uber Diablo. And this sparked an interesting confusion in the mix of exactly what was going on behind the background as to what would cause it to sometimes work and sometimes not, depending on what was going on. We also slowly started to understand exactly what the mechanics were as to why it was sometimes working and why it was sometimes not working. Because, well, it just has specific mechanics on how that functions. And I'm going to show you exactly how this works right now, and then we're going to talk about the specifics because I have the dirty details as to what exactly is going on in the background and why. So let's get Uber Diablo injured here. First thing we got to do is just give him the what. Let's clear it out real nice here so we have a good open playing field so we don't have to worry about anything. Alright, one more skeleton hiding in the midst there. Come here, mister. You know what? There we go. Alright, so let's bring Uber Diablo over here where it's nice and empty and we don't have to worry about any monsters interfering. And one of the things that we're going to do here is we're going to show off his regeneration. So right now I do not have any Prevent Monster Heal on. And if you attack Uber Diablo and you deal a certain amount of damage to him, eventually he will start to regenerate. We're going to go ahead and get him down a little bit just so I can show you his regeneration. So as you can see, he's currently at the O in Diablo, and his regeneration is very thick. It's a very thick boy regeneration. He can regenerate his HP relatively fast to the point where if you don't have enough damage output, there's no way you're going to be able to counteract his regeneration, that's for sure. In this particular case, you can see he's pretty much back up to full in about no time. Now, Prevent Monster Heal does work on Uber Diablo. And you might be asking, well, what do you mean it doesn't work on Uber Diablo? Well, it's kind of like a pseudo working. And this is something that we've tested many, many times, is that it does work, but it also doesn't work. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use it on him right now, and this is my helmet. It's the Blackhorn's face, which is actually really good for Ubers, like as a budget item. It's not like endgame, best in slot or anything, but it comes with Prevent Monster Heal. It has massive amounts of lightning resistance, as well as slows target, and you can also socket it and throw some more lightning res in there if you want to, or other stats. It actually comes in pretty handy for like Uber Mephisto and things like that. Now, as you can clearly see, I'm going to stop attacking him now, and he's not going to regenerate, right? Prevent Monster Heal doesn't, not work on him. The double negative there. It actually does indeed work on him, but the problem is that there is a thing in the game called suspension. Now, if I run away from Uber Diablo for a certain period of time, or if I go back to town, you don't actually have to leave the area. You only have to leave the vicinity of Uber Diablo for a certain period of time. And once you've left the vicinity of Uber Diablo, he will be put into suspension. And I have some more details on this. We'll go over it in a little bit, but I just want to show you how this works. So the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look at how his suspension disables. So first thing that I've noticed about the suspension is it doesn't automatically disable. So you notice that he's not regenerating yet. I'm going to go ahead and take off Blackthorn's face because I don't want to reapply Prevent Monster Heal to him when I hit him. But when I hit him one time, after leaving in suspension, you'll notice that he starts to regenerate again. And this is because he was put into suspension, and when I hit him, he has now left suspension. The suspended mode doesn't actually require a whole lot. It just simply requires you to not be near Diablo in terms of how the game functions. And it's so specific that it could potentially be you going to town, for instance. So let's go ahead and reapply Prevent Monster Heal to him really quickly. And we're going to bring him down to the O. So there you go. He's at the O, right? I'm going to go to town. And we're going to walk away from the waypoint too, because sometimes the waypoint, like the entrances to things, will actually have something to do with it. So we're just going to walk away from the waypoint, and then we're going to come back. And you'll notice that he still is not regenerating, not yet anyway, because he hasn't been activated out of his suspension yet. I know it's kind of silly. But once you tap him, at least one time, you can see that he starts regenerating again. And let's go over the specifics of what's going on and why this happens so that you guys understand how suspension works in Diablo 2. Now, I originally had my own understanding of how suspension works. However, I didn't know the full details. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to actually contact somebody who actually did know the full details. And I contacted Peter Hu, which is one of the original developers for Diablo 2, and he actually worked on these systems. He was more than happy to talk with me about it, and I managed to get the skinny on exactly what's going on in the background. So if you will pardon me using the words of the master who actually programmed this stuff, we're just going to read what he had to say. So I asked him a question about the suspension system, and he responded with this. He said, it's true that when a monster leaves your area of interest, your AOI, it gets suspended. The AOI isn't a fixed distance, but rather a set of blocks near your character that are considered close by, but more in a virtual sense than a raw distance. For example, when you leave a dungeon, the area around the dungeon's entrance is still in your area of interest and won't leave your area of interest until you run farther away. Another example is as you run through the world, your area of interest is a raggedy trail of blocks that you've recently run through and not a fixed square around you. In other words, what he's saying here is that your character kind of has this area of interest that it generates as it runs through the world. And if you leave the vicinity of a monster in a far enough way, either by going to town or just simply running away to a sufficient distance, the area of interest essentially leaves that monster, and the monster is then put in a state of suspension. It literally gets suspended. Now, why would this happen? Well, it happens because servers need memory. And if you think about Diablo 2, Diablo 2 was back in 2000. We're talking like Pentium servers. And he kind of goes over that as well. He says, well, when the monster is suspended, it gets compacted and it takes up less memory because server memory is very dear. This compression isn't an exact snapshot of the monster's state. It's an algorithm that selects what will be saved. He said he didn't remember exactly what details of Prevent Monster Heal, even though he was the one that implemented it originally. It was a long time ago. But I can make a pretty educated guess. He said, if it has a duration, the easiest way to implement it would have been to have it apply a status effect to the monster when first applied. The status effects were commonly how we implement temporary conditions because they encoded duration and could automatically fall off on expiry. Each status effect would have in its data a field indicating whether or not it should be saved during the suspended state, and my guess is that I simply didn't set Prevent Monster Heal to save. Which means that essentially what's happening is, and it's the exact opposite of what I thought. So what I thought was happening is that the monster was going into suspension and then it was clearing all the debuffs off the monster upon suspension. But what he's saying is that when the monster goes into suspension, it has a list of things that it either saves or doesn't save. And he's saying that Prevent Monster Heal probably just wasn't set to save, and that's why Uber Diablo loses his Prevent Monster Heal when you pull him out of suspension, essentially. He also goes on to talk about the Diablo 2 servers. He says Diablo 2 servers were Pentium CPUs in 2000, after all, and only had 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's crazy. Each CPU had to support 1,000 players in order for it to be cost effective, and memory was a major bottleneck. In our first large-scale multiplayer test, the server ran out of memory within 30 minutes due to memory fragmentation. One of the most salient memories Peter Hu has is during that time was he ended up spending 48 nonstop hours over the weekend to architect and write an entirely novel memory management system that could handle what we were doing and be able to continue the playtest. And they said, yeah, that's right. The other side of the portal would have been considered part of your AOI. So like the Even I think even the waypoint probably counts. Like when you go back to town, the other side of the waypoint essentially is part of your area of interest. But what he was saying is that essentially the servers had to handle massive number of players, and on top of that, like every single monster being active on the field wasn't really a good idea. So what happens is the monsters that are active are only the ones that are actually in your area of interest. And so even if you just run away from a monster a little bit too far, it can clear essentially some of the debuffs off the target. Now he did say that some of the things would save and some of them wouldn't. Some of them were too short to even really matter, like a 2-second poison. I mean, even if it did save the 2-second poison, when you came back, the 2-second poison would already be gone. So I don't know if that really matters. He said it's a bit hard to explain what D2 in our current game too, though the future optimizations that I've thought of since D2 days. Shout out to the current game, which is the Moonbeast game, which they're currently working on the Moonbeast game as well, and it's absolutely amazing, by the way. You should definitely check that out. At its simplest level, imagine the world is divided into a grid. If you're in a grid square, it's counted as ring 0. When you leave a square, its ring increases to 1. All other squares in your area of interest also increase by 1. Once a square's ring value is greater than some threshold, typically 3 or 4, it becomes suspended. This basic algorithm then has to be extended to multiplayer, where every player maintains their own area of interest, and a square doesn't become suspended until it leaves everyone's area of interest. It just saves the data that has been marked to save, so the HP, of course, and various other stats. But this is determined on a per stat basis and also status effects, but only the status effects that are marked to be saved, and things like inventory, if any. What's not saved is either reconstructed based on the default data for that entity or omitted entirely if it wasn't marked to be saved. So very interestingly enough, we essentially accidentally uncovered a system that essentially allows the monsters to be suspended for the purposes of saving memory. And it makes a whole lot of sense, because as you're running around, you're going to be activating tons and tons and tons and tons of monsters. And essentially those monsters cease to be active when you move far enough away from them, essentially allowing them to be put in the state of suspension. As you can see here, I can take this monster, I can go ahead and bring him down all the way to essentially, like say, let's just bring him down to like the D, right? Or below the D. Shouldn't take that long for this guy. He's usually pretty quick at killing targets. You could probably even use some holy bolts on him. Even though technically I'm sure that, do I not have my crushing blow set up? I don't have my crushing blow set up on this guy. This is just this is a solo self-found player's aid character, so he's not exactly the bee's knees of my my North Star Smiter setup, but he does just fine. Alright, so as you can clearly see, we have him down below the D. He is Prevent Monster Healed. We're going to take off the Prevent Monster Heal helmet. And we're going to go back to town. Actually, we don't even have to go back to town. We can just run away. And once we've left his area of interest, he will be put into a suspended state. So we're just going to like sit here and just murder this monster real quick. And we come back. Well, when we come back, he's not going to regenerate because he's still in suspension, technically, is what it seems like anyway. And it seems like as soon as you touch him for the first time, that's when the suspension ends. So now that we've hit him at least one time, you notice now he starts to regenerate again. Now, one thing that I did notice about this suspension is that it gives you an opportunity to reapply that buff before you have him get pulled out of a suspension. And I don't know if that was deliberate or whatever, but you can always just simply hit him again with the Prevent Monster Heal when you go out of suspension. The too long didn't read of this is that if you leave Diablo's area for any given period of time and he is put into suspension, or you go back to town to purchase more potions, or you go back to town to check your stash for whatever reason. There are 100 reasons why you might essentially move out of his range for some silly purpose. Maybe you take a portal back, maybe you're dying and you just need to go get more potions. There are tons of reasons why you could potentially put him in suspension. But when you come back, if you make sure to hit him at least one time with your Prevent Monster Heal, he won't regenerate anymore because now you've essentially reapplied the prevent monster to heal after he gets pulled out of suspension. So you don't have to worry about that regeneration occurring again. What other implications this could have across the entire game, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're going through the game at an extremely fast pace, it could potentially have other problems. I also noticed that this was an issue back in Diablo 2 when it first launched. So I'm not sure if you guys remember, but the game was originally set up with like super ultra wide monitors, and people were essentially finding out that the monsters were kind of like in a suspension mode. Like they wouldn't actually come and attack you when they were more than a certain distance away. And it probably had to do with this very suspension feature, is that essentially what was happening was is they were too far away from the monster for the monster to be counted as active. And so you were able to essentially shoot the monster from off screen essentially and kill the monster without the monster ever activating, which was really quite funny. Oh man, that came out of nowhere. Now this was actually limited, so I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but if you look up Diablo 2 ultra wide, so Diablo 2 super ultra wide limits. So Diablo 2 was limited to, what was it, 19 by 9, I think what it was. So AIs don't work correctly with wider aspect ratios. The game's engine was built on an older 19 by 9 or 16 by 9 logic, and allowing the true 32 by 9 support would give unfair advantage and break the intended game balance. As a result, the game is letterbox, displaying in a 16 by 9 ratio with black bars on the sides to maintain fair game for all players. The crazy thing is that this wasn't actually like a limitation of just simply making it fair for players. As it says right here, it says that the game's original mechanics, particularly monster AI, don't work correctly with wider aspect ratios. And I would gather, fathom a guess that the reason why this is because the monsters are essentially being put in suspension past a certain distance. In other words, like if you had the ability to see, like one full screen to the right and one full screen to the left, that might be just far enough out of the way to essentially make the monster go into suspension because they're out of your area of interest, allowing you to essentially abuse the monster off screen. Although I'm not exactly sure how many abilities can actually attack that far away to abuse a monster off screen, but so be it. Anyway, I hope you find this interesting. It is definitely something that is very interesting to me. Diablo 2 is very near and dear to my heart, and having a chance to pick the brain of Peter Hu was absolutely to die for. On top of that, he blew my mind back because, quite honestly, even though I thought it was one way, he was like, nope, it's complete opposite. He goes, it's not clearing the buff, it just forgot to save it entirely. Anyway, as always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content, and keep watching.